Well, good morning. Welcome to the Science Mind class. I'm Dr. Petra Weldis here at CSLDallas. We went from 80 degrees, 3 or 4 days ago, down to 34 this morning. Big 50-degree swing, so it's a gorgeous day here. I hope it's a gorgeous day wherever you are. And we are finishing up this introductory chapter, the thing itself, of the Science of Mind. And so this is the section on page 32. It starts with learning to trust will make us happy. And there's such an interesting, the first two paragraphs of this section are really, really interesting. One of the things that I love about the way that Ernest Holmes writes is that sometimes he writes in a very assumptive manner. And I love that he assumes that this is true for all of us. That all people seek some relationship to the universal mind, the oversoul, or the eternal spirit, which we call God, and that life reveals itself to whoever is receptive to it, right? This is fundamental to our teachings. But he goes on to say that we have an intuitive knowing that this is true about us. That we have an intuitive knowing that not only is this true about us, but this is true about all people. And if that's true, why don't we grow up and express that all the time? Why don't we grow up and express our intuitive knowing that we're all part of this whole, that we're all one in that universal truth? And as I was preparing for this morning, it reminded me of a song. I don't remember who wrote it. And the song is called We Have to Be Carefully Taught. And I don't know if you remember it. We have to be carefully taught to hate. We have to be carefully taught to fear. We have to be carefully taught. Children must be carefully taught. And it's really an extraordinary thought that the reality of it is that we do come in with an intuitive experience of the joy of life. I mean, I don't know about you, but I sure see it in my granddaughter. I saw it in my son when he was born. I saw it as he was a toddler, that infectious joy of life, that assumption. Actually watched my granddaughter. We went to the children's aquarium yesterday with my son, and she was, I can't remember, she was somewhere where it was a little bit uncertain. Her footing was a little bit uncertain, and her dad was a little bit behind her, and I was kind of off to the side, right? And as she was navigating this, she simply put her hand up. She didn't even look. She simply put her hand up and assumed that there would be an adult there to grab it. Just absolutely trusted that, and of course my son took, a long stride forward, grabbed her hand, so that she would feel more certain over this uncertain area that she was walking in. And I had such a moment of, wow, she's barely over 2. And that's the assumption, that's the intuitive knowing and the intuitive expectation that we come in with. That we're connected, that we're going to be taken care of. And we have to be taught otherwise. Well, we're taught by the experiences that we have in our childhood. We're taught by our families, if that's not true. We're taught by society, that's not true. We're taught that in school by the teachers or by the bullies on the playground, that it feels like it's not true. But one of the things that we want to do in our spiritual work, and one of the reasons why we talk about meditation and mindfulness and all of these practices, is to get underneath this teaching. To get underneath it and to get back to that intuitive sense right? And when we have that experience in our spiritual practices, we have the experience in a spiritual practice that is in a, what should we say? It's in an experience that is removed from all of that stimulation, all of that activation that can happen, right? So that we can have that experience and remember and reconnect with what we intuitively know to be true, right? So that we can then take it out into the world, so that when we're activated, try not to be activated with all the things we've learned, but come from that deeper intuitive place. And so he's restating here what we are focusing on in terms of the thing itself. That we are living in a spiritual universe which includes the material or physical universe has been the conclusion of the deepest thinkers of every age, right? And he's really talking about the mystics. And people, no matter what tradition, spiritual tradition or indigenous tradition, that has been the deepest thinking. That this spiritual universe must be one of pure intelligence and perfect law, dominated by love, by reason, and by the power to create, seems an inevitable conclusion. And so one of the things we're doing in our conversation to build this philosophical understanding is we're going to see whether or not that is in fact an inevitable conclusion. That's what we do in the whole rest of this book. All of this part of the book is about exploring this spiritual universe. Is it one of pure intelligence and perfect life? Does it make sense that it's dominated by law, by reason, and the power to create? So this power honors our faith in it, right? Because it's a law. And here he goes on to, intuitively we sense that every person in their native state is some part or manifestation of this eternal principle, and that the entire problem of limitation, evil, suffering, and uncertainty is not God ordained, but is the result of ignorance. Now, ignorance is simply ignorance of this spiritual truth, right? It's not stupidity. It has nothing to do with how much education we have, where we were born, where we were raised, or our environment. It has to do with our ignorance of the spiritual truth, that which we have been carefully taught, which is maybe in many ways counter to the intuition that we actually have as children. It has been written that the truth shall make us free, provided we know the truth. And we note that the evolution of our consciousness brings with it the acquisition of new powers and higher possibilities. Right? So as we have evolved, humanity has evolved, the human species has evolved beyond its purely biological imperatives into an opportunity to look around and ask the question, what in the world is going on here and how does it work? Right? All of the philosophies and religions and science and psychology has worked to answer those questions. And as we evolve, our consciousness evolves, we have the acquisition of new powers and a higher possibility. Not that they weren't always already there, right? Not that they weren't always already there, but the point is, as the consciousness evolves, we can now more consciously engage in it, as opposed to simply being on our operating out of what we believe to be true or the way we've been taught to think about the world. And this isn't just, it isn't just the way that our family has treated us. It isn't just the way that maybe religion has answered these questions, but it's also the way science has answered these questions. In the last 400 years, we've become utterly fixated on facts. Is it factually true? And we've forgotten the power of story and myth and intuition and all of these other ways of knowing, And so we want to bring all of that back in our engagement and exploration of the science of mind and spiritual living. We want to recognize that even our physical senses, which teach us that which show us, or through which we experience separation, even that in and of itself is not the whole story. So our ignorance is, again, it's not stupidity, and it's not necessarily always because of how we've been taught. It's that we have not yet fully embraced that which is the intuitive truth of ourselves. So, we find ourselves, this is the top of page 33, we find ourselves torn by confusion, by conflict, by affirmation and denial, by emotion, congested by fear, congealed by pride. We are afraid of the universe in which we live, suspicious of people around us, uncertain of the salvation of our own souls. All these things negatively react and cause physical disorders, psychological disorders, right? And our inability to engage in our lives from that wholly free way. And so we're going on here now to kind of remind ourselves or encapsulate nature awaits our comprehension of her. And since she is governed by immutable laws, the ignorance of which excuses no one from their effects, the bondage of humanity must be a result of our ignorance of the true nature of reality. The science of mind is a study of the true nature of reality in its totality: spiritual, mental, psychological, physical, emotional. What other ways are there? Psychic, all the ways. Then all of it as a wholeness, right? That's the wholeness. All of it being and understanding the nature of reality. So the key to this door is held in the mind of intelligence working in accordance with universal law. We learned so we've talked about this. We're going to talk about this over and over and over again, the problem of evil and ignorance and limitation, right? It's because we don't understand and we don't operate from the nature of reality that we are learning. And so what happens is that, hang on. Through experience, we learn what is really good and satisfying, what is truly worthwhile. So all of the outpicturings that are unlike what we intuitively know life should be like, right? It's feedback. It's the feedback mechanism from how we as individuals, our families, our cultures, and humanity itself is ignorant of the true nature. And so, of course, what we experience then is the result of that ignorance, not in alignment with spiritual truth. And as we begin to become aware of our ability to use this creative power, and we focus it on certain things which are good and satisfying, and we begin to experience those, do you see, we are being educated by the very process of consciously seeking to learn about the nature of reality and seeking to utilize it. We are learning how to engage with these universal principles and with this creative power. And so over and over and over again, we want to remember that suffering is not required to grow. Suffering is not God ordained. Divisiveness and all the ways in which we experience ourselves in conflict with other people, none of it is for our good. Nobody is making this happen so we will grow up and awaken. It's happening because it's an outpicturing of our own ignorance. And what we get to do is decide that we want to be conscious enough to see and to learn, this doesn't move life forward. This doesn't bring joy. This doesn't manifest or doesn't embody oneness. These kinds of ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, acting, engaging, right? They're not getting the results that are satisfying and that provide a fulfilling life. And so over and over and over again, we want to remember that there's nobody out there saying, well, I think we're going to have to teach humanity a lesson. Or these things are happening for a reason because something outside of us is trying to teach us something. No, they're happening for a reason because the law works. That's the reason they're happening. Because what's being put out, how people are seeing things, is how it's being reflected back out of the feedback of the experiences, right, out here in the world of condition. And so what is more useful, rather than to say there's a reason for it, is to remember that there's always a cause. Do you see the difference? It's a subtle but so important difference. A reason, when we think there's a reason for it, we ask ourselves the question, well, why is this happening? And when we don't have anything else to say, and we don't know what else to say, we, like all the generations before us, we say, well, it's a mystery. It must be God or spirit or the gods or, that's making this happen for a reason. No, it's happening for a cause, because causes were set in motion. False beliefs, beliefs of division, beliefs of otherness, beliefs of fear and suspicion, beliefs of needing to dominate, beliefs of whatever it is. And that's what plays out, and that's the feedback we get. Do you see? And so it's more valuable and more interesting to remember that there's a cause. It's not about trying to figure out the reason. And when we do that, do you see, we're moving into a greater embodiment of the truth of who we are, which is co-creators. Because we too are using the law all the time. And we are actively taking our place and our part in that. We're owning it, taking responsibility for it, and then asking ourselves, ultimately, right, how do we set new causes in motion? And so that clear, intuitive understanding that we're part of the whole opens the door. Not only are we part of the love, but we're also part of the universal law. And we are able to engage with it consciously as opposed to unconsciously having it run. Okay, so the last paragraph of this learning to trust the universe, learning to trust will make us happy. When we learn to trust the universe, we shall be happy, prosperous, and well. We must learn to come under that divine government. What does he mean by that? Not like there's a king or a ruler out there, right? Under the divine government, which is the authority of the universal law. We have to become under that, meaning we have to stop thinking that we can get away with it, right? We can get away with, if I'm loving, somehow the universe is going to reward me with a promotion or with more money or with health. No, the divine government says when we're loving, we get more love. If we want other things, we actually have to pay attention to other things. We have to utilize the universal laws and accept our authority in that government. And accept the fact that nature's table is ever filled. Never was there a cosmic famine. Of course, he quotes Emerson, "The finite alone is wrought and suffered. The infinite lies stretched in smiling repose." God is always God. Spirit is always spirit. Life is always life. Whatever words you want to use. No matter what our emotional storm or what our objective situation may be, there is always a something hidden in the inner being that was never violated. We may stumble, but always there is that eternal voice, forever whispering within our ear, that thing which causes the eternal quest, that thing which forever sings and sings. And what is that but the universal truth of who we are? That we are individualized expressions of that universe, which means that we partake of the nature of that. And that's the thing we have to own. That's the thing we have to know about ourselves. All right, so we're going to stop there. And I already see we have a comment or a question in the room. And so we're going to stop there, and we're going to say good morning to Ryan and to Richard. And we're going to see what's going on out there online. And we're going to answer some questions here in the room. Hi, Ryan.
Well, hello, everybody. Hi. The guy over here in the corner. And for those online, the guy in the sky. Welcome everybody for watching us. We have a lot of people from all over the world watching us today, so I really appreciate you guys tuning in no matter where you're at. And I see some of our northern friends have been getting snow dumped on them, so shout out to them. Stay warm, stay dry, right? So yes, this is an engaging discussion. We encourage everybody to participate. And the way that we do that is for the folks that are here in the room, go ahead and just raise your hand. And the iconic Richard over here will help by giving you a microphone. And just say your name and what your question or comment is. And then that helps the folks online to hear it. And then they know what's going on here in the room. And for those who are here on Zoom with us, you can hit the raise your hand icon located down below. Or share with me your questions and comments inside of the chat. And I can bring those into the room as well. And for the folks that are on Facebook, same goes true for you. Go ahead and put your questions and comments in there, and I'll bring those into the room. And as always, I'd like to keep those anonymous, so that way we have a safe container of spiritual growth. So I notice that we have, it's my favorite commentor over here. Shauna, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Good morning, Ryan. I'm Shauna, and I'm just glad you finished on this paragraph. This is one of my favorite paragraphs, and this is just a affirmation paragraph for me, right? That, trusting the universe, we will always be happy, prosperous, and well. And I love the way it goes on to say, God is always God, and I always add to that, God is always good, right? Because it's a good reminder we all have these other messages that you're talking about. And then the last section of that paragraph where he talks about the inner voice, I always think about my inner being whispering, 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 and am I allowing myself to hear it?
Yes.
Right? And I just, for me, it's a really powerful, I don't know if I can call it a mantra, but it's something I try to whisper to myself, that when I get worried or fearful or scared, to just return to the inner being and listen to the whispers. Yeah. I just love this paragraph.
Thank you, Shauna. I do too. Right. I just love what you said and how important it is to remember that in the middle of whatever is going on. And of course, it is why we seek to become still, so that we can hear it, because it's there. It's there. And if we'll shift our focus just that little bit, all of a sudden we see it and hear it and feel it. Yeah. And this is one of the things that I love about Holmes's writings, is while sometimes his explanations can get a little convoluted, because he's just trying to say it over and over and over again in different ways, so that it'll like hit in some way that he says it will make sense. But these strong affirmative paragraphs that remind us of spiritual truth, yeah, they're really powerful. Thank you. All right, Ryan, we've got somebody online, and then we have somebody here in the room.
Yeah, let's do this. Let's go here Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Here's the microphone for you. We're going to go ahead and go to the person here in the room, and then I'll read this question.
Great.
How about that?
This is a great topic. I love it.
Say
What do you make of trying to interpret cause and effect? How so often something that happens on an emotional plane affects the physical plane, or on the psychic or auric plane. And very often we misattribute the cause and effect, right? We might say something was caused by this, but in reality it was caused by that. And sometimes it's almost impossible to know unless you're really tuned in. You might have to have a very deep meditation session, or speak with a mentor or counselor to help you get down to the root cause of something that you're experiencing or something that's happening in the world. But what do you make of the ways these cause and effects just jump right across dimensional planes like that?
Well, yeah, because we're whole, right? So it only is from a one point of view that those are different dimensional planes. Because that's a wholeness, a oneness, we too are that. And so, of course, the body affects the psyche affects the emotions affect the mind affects the body, right? Because it's a wholeness. And so you can enter into the healing process or the awakening process or the shifting process at any of the levels. What we want to remember from a science of mind point of view is what science of mind adds to the process is that we are always looking for the mental and spiritual cause. That's the piece we add, right? Alternative medicine and allopathic medicine, they're looking for the physical cause. And therapy and psychology is looking for an emotional cause or a cause on our psychological level, right? And so we can work with all of that. And in the science of mind, with our spiritual work, we're focusing specifically on the plane of consciousness and the recognition that all physical effects, all experiences in the conditional world are always effects of a mental and spiritual cause. And we want to add that to the mix, right? Not in opposition to, or not to replace all the other things that we do, but to remember that that is as important. It is as important to do that work as well. Now, I love your question, Nikki, because often it feels like we simplify this so much. Well, if I'm sick, I should focus on the opposite, and I'll heal myself simply by focusing on the opposite of that. And that's not always true, right? It can be a combination of causes, which are usually beliefs that we hold, which then outpicture as emotions or behaviors. And those things now impact, right? Our emotions and behaviors impact our bodies. And so simply focusing on wholeness may not be enough. We may want to explore it some more. The other thing that I would say is I'm only interested in asking what the cause might be if there's a pattern that's revealing itself. Not everything is created because there's a hidden cause, or because there's a, not because, let me start that sentence over again. Sometimes the truth is it's such a Gordian knot of causes that what we really just need to do is set a new cause in motion. Right? Neuroscience teaches us this. Neuroscience teaches us that focusing on the old belief simply reinforces it. But if we create a new thought pattern, we create a new synaptic pathway. And the more that we think along that synaptic pathway, the more, well, we might use the metaphor, the more lanes in the highway we are building. And that 6-lane highway that we used to have, it slowly shrinks because we are less and less and less thinking that particular way, which is firing those synapses, which is causing that synaptic pathway to stick together. The less we think along those lines, the less those synaptic pathways are activated, and they have shown that eventually they literally just they just stop being welded together. Do you see? They're welded together because we're thinking those sets of thoughts, and that keeps that highway growing. And so so just thinking about it as a metaphor, if you have two roads, one is a 6-lane highway, and one you start building the one lane, 2 lanes, 3 lanes, and this one is this, as we are forcing ourselves, disciplining ourselves to move to trust, to move to trust, to move to trust. It must be good. So good has to come of this, good has to come of this, good has to come of this. I don't necessarily have to untie that whole knot. If I'm really building that new groove and I'm saying good must come of it, that will now begin to impact the way that I think about it, the way that I feel about it, the things that I do, the behaviors, right, that I engage in, because I'm building that new pathway. On the other hand, we also teach act as if. Sometimes you change the behavior, and that is also activating that new groove that you've decided on. And so we don't want to oversimplify it. There is not always, especially because we're such complex beings, spiritual beings having a human experience, there's not always one identifiable cause. And we make a mistake if we oversimplify it. My experience is that many of us have what I call octopus beliefs. And they're the core somehow belief that has been created that's not in alignment with spiritual truth. But it's so core that it has tentacles in every area, right? And so it's not always obvious, right? That our relationship or our bodies or our money or our happiness or our joy or our sense of creative expression, it's not always obvious that all of these things are all being impacted by this one really deep false idea about life. And when we can uncover that, usually it's by looking at patterns rather than a specific effect. When we can uncover that and begin to work with that, the miracle, the magic, is that many areas of our life begin to shift, begin to work better, because this deeply seated, deep-rooted belief, we're releasing that groove and we're building new ones. So we never want to oversimplify all of this, and we might never know all the causes or all the ways that we've turned effects into causes, right? Which is essentially what an addiction is, or a belief that if I just, eat that sugar or have that drink or take that thing, it's going to make me feel better, right? That's turning an effect into a cause. It's all so what we try to focus on the most in the science of mind is setting new causes in motion. And we set that new cause in motion by knowing the truth, the nature of reality, and the truth about ourselves. When we do that, we're undercutting all of that, all the things we've been carefully taught to believe, because they're not in alignment with spiritual truth. They're not in alignment with the nature of reality. They're not in alignment with what's really always going on anyway. And so that which is in alignment is just simply going to have so much more power than the thoughts that have been created that have become these false beliefs. So it's a great question, and we can enter into the wheel in any place. What we don't want to do is leave out the mental and spiritual cause piece. And that's what the spiritual work and the science of mind adds to the whole mix. So great question. Thank you. All right, Ryan, we're going to turn to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. But this is going back to the statement you made earlier about suffering is not a requirement to grow. And so the question says suffering is not a choice in often cases, as far as like, well, I'll just read it. Suffering is not a choice for a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old or maybe an adult who suffered a trauma. Can you please expound a little bit more on what you meant by suffering is not a requirement to grow, especially when it deals with...
Sure, absolutely, absolutely, and it's a great question. What I didn't say was that pain doesn't happen. Trauma creates pain. And yes, a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old experience pain. What makes it turn into suffering is the story that we tell about it. The belief that we create because of the pain, right? So I grew up in an abusive household, and so the belief that I created was that I was safe if I was invisible. So I spent years and years and years making myself invisible as I could possibly be, to keep myself safe, right? And I suffered a lot because I was making myself invisible. I didn't express who I was, right? Which is the seed of addiction. So I spent 10 years playing out all of the addictions that I could possibly enjoy. And it didn't help. It didn't help. Why? Because I was trying to make myself invisible. And that's not who any of us are, right? We're all here to express. So it was the story that I told. Now, I made up that story as a 4-year-old. I didn't know any better. And so my pain caused suffering. But as an adult, right, I got to do all kinds of things. I got to learn that it was my father's pain that was being played out, his suffering that was being played out. I learned that he was doing the best he could. I did enormous amounts of work in forgiveness to recognize that his pain had truly turned into monumental suffering within him, within his self, and he didn't know what to do with it. And I learned how to set boundaries, and I learned how to see that, no, actually I was here to express. And as I did all of that work, I rewrote the story, which does not in any way, shape, or form negate the pain that I experienced as a child, but I no longer suffer because of it. It no longer runs me, and I don't tell the story anymore. And I don't need for that story to hold me back. Pain is inevitable. Pain is inevitable in our human experience. Things don't go the way we like them to go. People have their own stories, and they do, in fact, impact us. Pain does happen. Trauma happens. It's the way in which we take it up and what we tell ourselves about it that causes this suffering. And a lot of what we tell ourselves is, I can't do anything about it. But I did do something about it. I ran away from home when I was 15. I didn't talk to my father for almost 10 years. During that time, I did incredible, deep, hard psychological work, spiritual work, all kinds of work, so that I could actually tolerate spending 3 days with my dad while he was still alive. 3 days at a time, that was my limit. That was my agreement to myself. 3 days. And I went into my room at 8 o'clock at night, because after that, you just didn't know what was going to happen. So I went into my room and I read my book. And I did what I needed to do at every level. But do you see, that's where we begin to take that apart. And of course, a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old is going to make decisions about life with a 3-year-old or 10-year-old mind. But we're not 3, and we're not 10. That's what I mean. We have to be carefully taught. We have these experiences, and those experiences as children are teaching us something about the world. The problem is what it's teaching us is not true. It's not in alignment with the nature of reality. It's not in alignment of who we really are. And so we have to begin to unravel that at whatever levels we do. I mean, I've done oodles and oodles of therapy and, almost 40 years of spiritual work. And that then regrounds us into the nature of reality and into the truth of who we are. And so, so I still have pain. Oh, you can think of, things around my son and the pain of the pain of the pandemic and trying to keep CSLDallas going with Ryan and Richard for 2 years online with just a camera. The pain of all of that, but we didn't turn it into suffering. Do you see? We actually turned it into creativity. That was the story we told ourselves, not the suffering. But the creativity, do you see? That's the causal. That's working at the causal level. Oh my God, I'm afraid. Or, oh my God, how creative can we be to make this work? Not that we don't have emotional moments of, or emotional moments of pain. I miss all the people. Where are they? Are they going to all go away? What's going to happen? But then we tell ourselves the new story. The nature of reality is this is a creative universe, and we are participating in that. So I, by God, am going to pick this up as a creative project. Do you see? Over and over and over again, we're shifting that. And so now it doesn't have to be suffering. Now it's an opportunity. So thanks for the question. It's a great, these are the things we have to wrestle with within ourselves. How do we take this up? How do we understand it? Right? And it's never, ever, ever, ever to belittle the experience. I will tell you that I spent a lot of years thinking, well, how could I have caused this abuse? Did I do something in a former life and abuse somebody else and blah, 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 and all of which just did nothing but make me feel worse. And then I realized, no. My father tore his family apart because that was his cause that he was setting in motion. And now I get to decide what I'm going to do with that. Am I going to allow it to continue to be cause in my life? Or am I going to set new causes in motion? That's what it means to understand the nature of reality and to understand who we are. To come back to that intuitive sense of who we truly are, which are pretty amazing beings, regardless of whatever experience we've ever had. And when we can trust that, we're not trusting other people, we're not trusting anything in the physical reality. What we're trusting is the truth of the universe, the nature of reality, the presence of love, and that there is this law, this universal law that we are forever using. What we want to do is use it consciously. All right, so we're going to finish this up. I thought we might finish it up today, but we're not going to. We're going to finish wrapping up the thing itself. There's another one of these affirmative paragraphs that Shauna was talking about, right? Wrapping up the thing itself. Some of them are they just sing. That's where Ernest Holmes wasn't a particularly good poet, but sometimes his prose is just really sings. And so we'll wrap it up next week, and we'll see. Maybe we'll start on the next chapter, which is the way it works. And we'll really start talking about that creative process. So we have people. So we want to say hello to those of you who are in Mexico and those of you who are in Florida. I hope you're okay with the most recent storm, all the people all over the world, and all of the people here in the United States, and all of you here in DFW who are also watching online. Thank you for joining us here in the room. We're so grateful. We will see you when we see you, as soon as we can see you. Bye for now.